Welcome to Burn On, Not Out, the podcast for founders and CEOs who are done being the bottleneck. I'm Brooke Dukes, and each week we expose the structural patterns that slow execution, overload founders, and keep decisions routing back to the top. And we install clear decision rules, defined ownership, and operating discipline that scales. Let's get into it. At some point in the last 2 years, you probably hired a leadership coach. Maybe you joined a mastermind or a book that really resonated with your current experience. Someone probably walked you through exactly why you keep becoming the escalation point in your company. They may have even given the pattern a name. They explained the psychology behind it. They mapped the root cause with enough precision that you nodded and thought, yep, that's it. That's exactly it. And you walked away with real insight. Then you went back to work, and the decisions kept coming back to you. You were in a meeting last week where someone should have made a call on their own. They didn't. It came back to you. You handled it. You knew, even as you were handling it, that you shouldn't be handling it, but you did it anyway. Not because you forgot what you learned, not because you stopped caring about changing the pattern. Something else is happening here, something that most leadership development training never addresses. Here's what I want to offer you today. Understanding why you do something is not the same as being able to stop it. So, let's start with the fact that most leadership conversations skip past entirely. The majority of your decisions today were not made consciously. I don't mean philosophically, I mean it mechanically. The brain is a prediction machine. Its primary job is not original thought. Its primary job is efficiency. It takes the inputs from your environment and runs them through the pattern library that you've been building since before you could walk. Every experience, every crisis, every moment where a particular response kept you safe or got you the result that you needed. So by the time you're running a company, let's say of 12 people, 3 million in revenue, that library, that storage library is enormous. And it's running constantly in the background, without your permission, and most of the time without your awareness. So here's what that looks like on any given Tuesday. A team member sends you a message at 9 a.m. Hey, Sue, quick question about that client situation. Do you have a minute? Now, before you're even done reading the message, something in your brain has already categorized it and already assessed the threat level, already started creating a response. So by the time you reach that last word, your answer is already formed. The decision was made before you consciously knew you made it. Most of the time, that speed is generally useful. The pattern library, it's not your enemy. In fact, it's a major contributor to your ability to run a company at this complexity level without completely collapsing. But here's where it turns on you. The shortcuts that made you fast when you were a founder of, say, 3 people, do not go away when you become a founder of 50 people. They're still running. That same pattern that was created when you were the only person in the building who knew everything. You had the intellectual property, you knew the vision, right? When you had to be the decision point because there was no one else. That pattern is still the default. Now, your team size changed, your revenue changed, your org chart changed, but the pattern didn't. Because when a decision gets escalated to you now, the old program is running and it says, this is mine. I handle this because if I don't, something breaks. That program was accurate once. It kept the business alive and growing, and the business needed you that way. So let me give you a real life example. My daughter is a professional soccer player, and what I've watched her work through on the field is the clearest illustration I know of what it actually is happening in your brain when you step into a decision you already decided to stop making. She's played for years, and she's taken thousands of shots from the same position. Because of that, her body stops asking permission. The ball arrives, the plant foot drops, the hip opens, the shot fires. That sequence is completely automatic. It runs faster than her conscious thought because that's exactly what all those years of repetition has taught her brain to do. Now, I want to say it was her sophomore year. Her coach wanted her to play in a different position. And he wanted her to start changing her shooting mechanics. There were some things that needed to change. And he explained it very clearly to her. And she totally understood it. She'd been playing since she was 4. So she worked on it in training. And she knew exactly what to do. She perfected it in training. And then a real game. The ball arrives, and under real pressure, when the stakes were high, that old pattern kicked right back in. Not because she forgot the correction, because she forgot what to do, not because she stopped caring about improving, but because the old pattern had been repeated thousands of times. And the new one just hadn't. She just learned it. Even though she'd practiced it for weeks in practice, it still could not override that one thing she'd been doing thousands of times the entire time she'd been playing. Because under pressure, the brain goes back to what it knows best. And that's not an athlete failure. My daughter didn't fail. That's how the automatic pattern actually works. The old sequence is faster, more established, and more trusted by the nervous system than any instructions the conscious mind is holding. Your decision pattern works the exact same way, but it's now the primary mechanism creating the bottleneck. And the critical piece, the part of that most leadership development training completely misses is this. You can be fully aware of that pattern and still not be able to stop it in the moment. So I want to explain why high-functioning, highly self-aware founders are still the bottleneck in their companies after years of working on it. Most leadership development trainings, they sell awareness as the solution. So they name the pattern. And they say, once you name the pattern, you'll be able to change it. Once you understand the root cause, then the behavior will shift. Well, that's not how it works. Awareness, yes, is very important. And it's the beginning of a diagnostic process. It's not the end of one. And treating it as the end, as the correction itself, is where a lot of smart founders get stuck for a really long time. So here's the actual sequence. You have a pattern, you have a default response, an automatic behavior that's been running long enough to be deeply established. So that awareness gives you a brief window between the trigger and the response. But the pattern is faster than the awareness. It kicks in a millisecond. The escalated decision comes in. The old program fires and it says, go, let's do this. You've already started solving it. Then your conscious brain catches up and it says, wait, hold on. I wasn't supposed to do that. But the response already happened. This isn't a willpower failure. It's a function of how automatic behavior actually works. Because the pattern operates below the level of willpower. You can't discipline yourself out of an automatic response while the trigger is active and the response is already in motion. This explains something I hear consistently from founders who have invested seriously in personal development work and leadership development. I know exactly why I do it. I can see it happening in real time. I can narrate the whole pattern while it's running, and I still can't seem to stop it. Yes, because knowing and stopping are two entirely different operations. Knowing lives in your conscious awareness, but the pattern runs below that. In the space between those two things, between knowing and stopping, is where most leadership advice leaves you completely alone. So let me give you a version of this in my own history. I lived this gap before I understood it clearly enough to name it. My last consulting firm, I was carrying everything. Anything from president to HR to operations to the person who noticed when the coffee ran out. I was working 12 to 15 hour days, making decisions in every area of the business from the time I woke up until the time I stopped pretending I was going to sleep. I was the textbook case of cognitive overload, and I knew it. I could feel it. I was aware in real time that I was operating on fumes. And that awareness changed nothing about what I actually did. So here's the example that I keep coming back to. We'd made a decision as a team, deliberately, over multiple meetings, to bring in a PhD to validate one of our assessments. We budgeted for it, we aligned on it, we started another project while we waited. It wasn't casual. It was a considered, finalized decision. One team member came to me with a concern about the validation methodology. He hadn't finished his sentence before I had already decided to pause the entire process. I didn't evaluate the concern. I didn't ask questions. I didn't weigh what we'd already committed. The reversal happened automatically, pulled by overwhelm, by the urgency signal that his concern triggered in me, by a brain that was so depleted it was defaulting to the fastest available response. I had defaulted to just get it off my plate. Keep moving forward, get it off my plate. And that decision reversal cost us $10,000 to $15,000 in team time alone. And here's what I want you to hear. I knew, even as it was happening, that I was exhausted. I knew I was shortcutting. I could narrate my own pattern in real time, but I couldn't stop it. That was the moment that I understood awareness is a diagnostic tool, not a correction tool. Those are two entirely different jobs. So here's what makes this specific pattern so costly. It's not just that the decision keeps coming back to you. It's what that pattern starts to tell you about yourself at a level you probably haven't said out loud. And at some point, maybe not today, maybe not last week, you've had a version of this thought. What if I'm actually the problem? Not the market, not the team, not the economy or the client load or the operational complexity at this stage of growth. What if it's me? What if the reason this company still runs through me is that I've made it that way? And if I've made it that way, if I'm the one creating the dependency, what does that mean about me as a leader? That question kept me up at night because for most founders at that level, the honest answer feels like, fuck, it must mean that I've failed at the most important job I have. To build something that doesn't need me in every decision, to develop a team that can execute without my daily involvement. I know what that job is, and I'm not doing it. So please hear this because it's the most important thing you can take from this episode. That question, the one that's running around your brain at 2 a.m., is not evidence of your leadership failure. It's evidence that an automatic pattern has run long enough and consistently enough that your company has been structured around it. The business adapted to that pattern and your team learned to escalate because escalation got results. Your workflow built around your availability because your availability was the most reliable variable in the system. The business organized itself around the way that your brain was already operating. The bottleneck is not a leadership flaw, it's a structural outcome. Because the unconscious pattern built the structure. The structure reinforced the pattern, and now the two of them are running a feedback loop that looks from the outside like a leadership problem. But it's not a leadership problem. It's a systems problem. And the correction is not what most people think it is. So I'm going to say this again. The bottleneck is not a leadership flaw. It's a structural outcome. Now, here's what changes when you understand this at the level we've been talking about today. The question is no longer, why do I keep doing this? You know why. The pattern is automatic, and it's faster than your awareness. It formed when it needed to form, and it's still running because nothing has been repeated long enough and consistently enough to replace it. So the real question is, what can actually intercept a pattern that operates below conscious thought? And the answer is not a better version of what you've already tried. Awareness operates at one level. The automatic pattern operates below it. Those are not competing tools at the same job. They don't even occupy the same layer. Awareness can see the pattern after it fires. What it can't do is stop the pattern before it fires. That's not a failure of your awareness. That's just how the two things naturally work. What can intercept an automatic program is something that operates at the same level the program does, in the architecture, not in your attention to respond differently, in the structure of how decisions are defined and routed before they ever reach you. When decision authority is defined in writing, the automatic question, is this mine to handle, doesn't get run. The answer is already built in the structure. The trigger is removed before the program fires. When the escalation pathway is restructured so that a class of decisions can't reach you by default, your brain doesn't have to override the old response. In fact, it doesn't even encounter the situation that prompts it. This is the difference between willpower and architecture. Willpower operates at the level of conscious intention. It works until the trigger is strong enough, the day is long enough, the pressure is high enough, and then the automatic response runs anyway. Architecture operates below that. It changes what the brain encounters before the automatic response has a chance to. This is not a mindset shift, it's a structural shift. And those are not the same corrections. They never were. The old paradigm is still running right now, below the level where your awareness lives. It ran before this episode, it will run after it. This is not a problem to fix today. That's a fact that defines what the next step actually is. Because remember, the relevant question is no longer, why is this still happening? You know why it's still happening. The question is, have you built something it can't override? Not have you understood it clearly, not have you committed to responding differently, not have you talked to your team about it again. Have you changed the architecture so that the old program encounters a structure it can't run through? That's the only question left. So if this episode landed, if what I described in the first 10 minutes is what you're actually living right now, I want to give you one specific next step. I run a free live event called the CEO Decision Reset. In 60 minutes, we get very specific. We identify exactly where the escalation points are in your company. We look at why they've persisted despite everything you've already tried. And we get clear on what the structural correction actually looks like, not in theory, in your business immediately. The link's in the show notes. Register and show up live. This is designed for founders who are done with the diagnosis and ready for the architecture that can actually change things. I'll see you there. Thanks for listening to Burn On, Not Out. If